Clean Skies News is on the road to Copenhagen. I'm Susan McGinnis here with our executive editor, Margaret Ryan. We're talking about what is happening now with these global talks. As world leaders gather in Copenhagen in December, they will try to build on the world's two previous global warming agreements. One is the UNFCCC treaty signed in Rio in 1992, and then of course 1997 was Kyoto, the Kyoto Protocol, and that, Margaret, was supposed to build on Rio?
Yes, it was essentially saying something, what those countries would do out of Rio. Rio itself was pretty general, and it divided the world in two, essentially. The Annex I countries, which were the industrialized countries, they were the ones who had commitments under Kyoto to cut back their carbon emissions, and then there was the rest of the world, which did not have legal commitments.
Okay, so that's what was behind the division of the Annex I countries, and everyone else is who was responsible for most of the emissions up until then?
Well, yes, it was a historic decision. I mean, historic in the sense of it was based on history. They said, look, the carbon that's in the atmosphere now, that didn't just come there yesterday. It's been accumulating for 150 years. So it's from the countries that were industrializing in the 19th and 20th centuries. Now, those are the countries whose emissions are causing global warming. All the other countries out there, they're just, in many cases, kind of the victims of global warming. So the countries that caused this should be the first to cut back, and they also should be the ones who are paying to help the innocent countries handle the damages that global warming might be causing. Now, the Annex I countries all committed to scale back their emissions. The goal was to get back to 1990 levels by the end of the compliance period. The compliance period under Kyoto was 2008 to 2012. And they before 2012, the assumption was these nations, the world's nations, would get together and they would negotiate a second compliance period, which would run from 2013 on. This is what we're trying to do in Copenhagen.
Okay, and now this was supposed to all be efforted through different mechanisms. Let's talk about some of the mechanisms inside Kyoto and how they work, because there were three different clear mechanisms for reducing emissions.
There was carbon trading, and we've seen that in Europe. The carbon trading mechanism, that's contemplated even in the US legislation, though there's nothing in there about joining Kyoto per se. The other two mechanisms were called the Clean Development Mechanism and the Joint Implementation Mechanism. They were both different ways of investors or countries investing in carbon reduction programs in other countries where it might be a lot cheaper to do it. It might be a lot cheaper, say, to control methane in a landfill in say, India than it was in Great Britain, for instance. And if you could do that, then the investing party could claim the carbon credits for these reductions, and they could trade them on the European trading system. So the CDMs and the JIs were also envisioned as a way to begin substantial transfers of money to the countries that needed it most.
Right, and that's a big issue going into Copenhagen. Now, these mechanisms are the same ones that are apparently going to happen with the Copenhagen Treaty as well?
Well, there's nothing about changing or taking away these mechanisms. There is controversy about expanding them. Not so much the trading market, that's fairly well accepted, but the CDMs in particular. There has been controversy about whether some of the projects that have been approved by this, they have to be approved by an executive board under the UNFCCC, and some of these projects maybe didn't meet the criteria involved. Maybe they were just projects that would have been done anyway. Kyoto requires what they call additionality. And also, some of the countries involved don't like the idea that the credits for carbon abatement in their country are actually going abroad, and there actually may be a way for the developed countries, who they blame for global warming, for not cutting back on their emissions at home.
Wow. Okay, so now the United States is widely known to not have agreed to Kyoto, but the truth is the U.S. did sign the treaty.
That's true. They did sign the protocol. They signed the UNFCCC treaty, and they signed the protocol, but the Senate, before that signature, had actually passed a resolution 95-0 that basically said they'd never ratify what was in the protocol. They would not accept the division where all the responsibility went to the Annex I countries. Now, President Bill Clinton never sent Kyoto to the Senate for ratification because it would have meant defeat. And of course, after he was elected, President George W. Bush withdrew the U.S. signature from the treaty. President Bush, of course, said he didn't believe in the way the treaty was withdrawn, and that what we should be doing is pursuing carbon reductions through technology, and indeed he pursued that course.
So how did things go without the U.S. On board here? Did the rest of the nations embrace Kyoto?
Well, the protocol actually struggled for 7 years to get enough backers, enough ratifiers for it to go into effect. The protocol specified that at least 55% of Annex 1 emissions, or countries representing those emissions, had to ratify the treaty before it took effect. And in 2004, Russia, which had, I believe, 17.5% of those emissions, did finally ratify the treaty, so that's when it took effect.
Okay, Margaret Ryan, thanks so much for taking us on this next step. This is helping us assess where we are. One of several backgrounders on the road to Copenhagen. Clean Skies News is providing. You can click on any and all of these to find out everything you need to know about these global talks coming up in December. I'm Susan McGinnis.